Welcome to the Paranormal Narrators channel. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the experience. I watched it happen in the street again this morning. The woman shambled out of the dark corner in between the two apartment duplexes on 5th and Terra. She was coated from head to toe in dried viscera. Her eyes were stitched wide, black and excreting black discharge. She saw a child walking by. Her son? It made no difference. The boy's fate was sealed as soon as she'd spotted him. In mere seconds, she let out an enraged shriek and she leapt upon him. Her teeth would rend the boy of his soft, tender flesh. The child's resistance was pitiful at best, only able to scratch and kick at his attacker. His squeals for mercy were heeded by none. I could only close my eyes and pray his suffering would not endure for long. I'd witnessed these occurrences for too long now to feel much beyond a slight weight of sorrow, unable to even shed a tear for the poor little lamb. The boy must have indeed been her son, for once she finished gorging herself upon him, she cradled that which was left of his shredded carcass to her gore-stained bosom and wailed in anguish to the sky. "Just like you, Harry." Suddenly, others gathered from all directions surrounding her. They all displayed various stages of cannibalistic mutilation across their bodies. Their eyes, too, were jaundiced with a feral hunger. Instantly, the mother reverted back to her former animalistic state and she leapt to attack the newcomer in the center. Her strike came true as she seized him and promptly fixed her jaws to his shoulders. The effort would prove vain, however, when two others would rip her off of him and proceed to devour her themselves before then ripping mindlessly into each other. I remained behind this dumpster in the alley across the street from the scene, silently envying the mother and her boy. Their pain was over. Do not think of me as callous or cowardly for wishing to remain in the shadows, as those I knew once as others mercilessly slaughter each other. It's not the fear of a gruesome end at their hands that frightens me. Rather, it's the endless despair I'd cast upon myself. I can feel the same hunger burn furiously inside me even as I write this, the primal desire to consume the flesh of another. Every time the sensation coursed through me, I'd seek from my pocket my photograph, the last photograph of myself and my son at the park that I took from his bedroom to remind me of the promise I made. This is where my tears would make themselves known. I'll never forgive myself for what happened, though with the passing of the previous two sunsets, I found a distinct loss of more and more of my stamina to resist going out and giving in. What exactly it is and how it started I honestly couldn't tell you. The things I do remember, however, are when it started here in my small town. It was just 3 or 4 months ago when mass reports came in about citizens being found in the act of devouring each other. Unlike what one would expect, there was no progression into this hellish anarchy. It was abrupt. Only mere hours before, these animals were simply neighbors and friends. From there to the present, as well as to the foreseeable future, this waking agony has been the way of life. At first, we thought it may have been an unknown contagion. This was quickly debunked, however, as the phenomenon seemed to occur too spontaneously and frequent for it to be an infectious spread. It was as if a switch had been flipped and all of mankind had turned feral in an instant. My family, when we could still be a family, called it FleshLust. Maybe that's all it really was at first, a lust for flesh. It would have been the simplest explanation, wouldn't it? But no, I would later see that this was something far worse than that. This was more akin to a force of nature. This was something that couldn't be fathomed or understood by human comprehension. Even calling it the wrath of God would be a lie. That would imply that we as humans could have prevented this. I've seen the truth, the awful truth. This was all preordained. This was how life was meant to carry on. Not long after it began, I began to experience premonitions. I saw the FleshLust occur and reoccur for millennia. I could see the world essentially destroy itself, every life form turning on each other. Each time only one would remain, only to live on as something else entirely, subjugated for as long as this earth existed, as it reformed and recreated life, only to destroy it again in the same manner. A never-ending cycle of torment. The meaning of life? The other thing I can remember was that the first one to succumb to it was my son, Harry. We had naturally bunkered ourselves inside our apartment after the first 100 or so reports of people being found in the act of mindlessly devouring each other, putting barriers around the windows and doors, and storing a large supply of food. We thought that abstinence from the outside world would provide security from the FleshLust, indulging in the fantasy that it would pass and we would be okay in the end. For a time, we felt satisfied with this conclusion. Times were hard, but we could feel safe in our home. We had each other, and that was enough. But one night, I awoke in a cold sweat after another of the nightmares to find that Martha was next to me in bed. I'd remembered that she said she was checking on her son because she said she heard noises in his room. I'd heard them too. They sounded like growled chanting. It was the same thing I'd heard from others who'd been affected by this FleshLust. Therefore, I simply thought it was just a bunch of them circling the house outside. I wasn't worried by it because they couldn't get in. That's when I heard what sounded like the growls of two dogs wrestling in a cage coming from Harry's room down the hallway. I heard screams follow immediately afterwards, causing me to bound out of bed and down the hall. When I got to the door, it appeared to be jammed. I could hear the growling getting louder and the screams got fainter. "Harry!" I shouted, pounding furiously on the door. "Martha!" The only response from the other side was a cracked, fading cry that was followed by an animalistic shriek. I started to ram the door with my shoulder, causing it to begin splintering the further it was stoved inward. As I kept battering the door, I could hear, in a hoarse, cracked voice, "How did they get in? Have they already gotten Martha? Is Harry okay? Oh please, God, don't let me be too late." Finally, the door collapsed off the hinges and I immediately turned on the light. The sight that I was greeted to was the worst moment in my life. There, sprawled out on the floor with her stomach flayed open like a fish, was my sweet, beautiful wife. Harry was hunched over her, stuffing more of his mother's organs into his mouth. I wanted to vomit, not even because I was disgusted, but because of the panic and disbelief. How could this have happened? We were supposed to be safe. He looked up at me, his marbled eyes excreting the black ichor. Harry. I didn't know what to say. My knees started to buckle. In an instant he lunged at me, seizing me and sinking his teeth into my throat. I was paralyzed, both from pain as well as shock. I struggled to pry him off of me, but his teeth were sunk deep into my throat. It felt like the more I tried to push him off, the more of my throat would be torn away. I finally had to jam the tips of my thumbs into his venomous eyes to make him release his jaws and throw him off of me. He was relentless and he was upon me again in seconds. He was on top of me, having toppled me over by hurling himself into me like a spear, and he began using his little fingers to dig into the gash in my throat, howling in the air. I could feel my vision cloud over with each second. I had begun to lose a good amount of blood by that time. I closed my eyes. not wanting my last memory of my son to be of the deranged beast he was in that moment. What end to life was this? Mauled by my own child? That was when I saw the same scene from my nightmares play out again. This time it was like I was right there, in the actual vision, feeling all the pain of those that were being viciously ripped apart. But a new feeling then followed close behind. Anger, wrath, hunger. A voice boomed from inside my head. The voice was indescribable, definitely inhuman. The new sensations began to make my head pound and throb, worse than the most aggressive migraine could ever produce. All I could think of was the need to taste human flesh. Is that what the others saw? What they felt? When I opened my eyes, I could see Harry roaring to the air with chunks of gore hanging from his bottom lip. I felt my eyes starting to burn and I grabbed him by the throat, constricting as tight as I could before hurling him into the wall behind him. I stood up, feeling a new surge of aggression that seemed to be supplying me with energy and strength. despite my serious injuries and loss of blood. I had no bearing on any higher reasoning or thought, only craving for flesh. For only a brief moment, I swear I saw Harry's little eyes change back into their former dark brown color as he looked up at me, almost scared. I towered above him, ready to grab him up by his throat and tear him from limb to limb. "Dad," I heard him squeak out. His eyes were wet, but not from the ravenous venom from before. No, these were actual tears. For a moment, I just leered over him. My mind was scrambling like I was caught in between the mindless urge to feed, while at the same time feeling a bit of conscious will to resist. "I'm scared, Dad." With that, I felt my higher brain function return and I knelt down to embrace him, tears now freely falling from my own face. He nestled his little head against my chest and clung to me for dear life. "It's okay. Dad's here. Dad's here," I quietly whispered to him, feeling him quiver in my arms. "Dad won't let anyone hurt you." I just held him there for hours, sitting in the middle of his bedroom beside the half-devoured carcass of his mother. Eventually, the both of us slowly drifted off to sleep. Of course, the nightmare plagued me again, causing me to awaken for a second time that night in panic. My son was still fast asleep in my arms. My head throbbed again and I felt the hunger return. The voice boomed again, though I couldn't place where the unnatural voice was coming from, far less whose voice it was. Something seemed familiar about it, almost natural. Was this the voice of God? The pounding became frantic. "Return flesh to the earth." I was confused, afraid, and yet angry at the same time. What did it mean? What even was it? I looked down at Harry. The hunger returned, more furiously than before. All I could imagine in that moment was what his tender flesh would taste like. Before I even realized it, I found myself drooling. My eyes began to burn again and I felt a black discharge run down my face again. "Dad, what are you doing?" I saw him staring sleepily up at me. What was I doing? Horrified, I instantly let go of him. Nothing. Here, go back to sleep. It's alright." After I tucked him back into his bed, I quickly and quietly left the bedroom. I took one last look over my shoulder, seeing him once more fast asleep. "Dad won't let anything hurt you." That was the last time I'd see my son. When I left his room, I quickly scrawled a message to my son, telling him that I'd always love him and that I would miss him, but that it just wasn't safe for me to be around him. I wrote that I wouldn't let him see me as one of them, as one of the mindless slaves of this FleshLust. Finally, I wrote to him to be safe and not to come looking for me. I placed the note on his nightstand and placed the photo in my pocket. I knew he wouldn't ever understand. He was only a boy. But it was the only surefire way I knew he'd be safe. That morning, before the sun had even fully risen, I tore down the boards to one of the windows and fled down the fire escape into the alley between this and the next door complexes. When I landed, I could hear a few others roaming about, and I quickly found cover behind the dumpster. From that day until now, I have remained hidden here. Often, especially when I see or hear sounds of the others engaged in a struggle nearby, I look up and wonder if my son is still okay. Sometimes, I'd wonder if he'd disobey my warning and try to seek me out. I pray he never does. He wouldn't even recognize me anymore. At first, it was relatively simple for me to resist the growing urge to feed. The photo and the promise that I wouldn't let him see me as one of them was enough to bring me back to my senses. When it slowly became more and more potent, that was when I sought another mean of relief. Using my old fishing knife, I would carve out bits and pieces of my own skin to satiate the cravings. Painful as it always was, it seemed to work, for a while at least. But as it grew, I had to carve out larger portions of myself to satisfy it. Maybe I'll finally carve too deep and it'll all be over. Each time I did, I'd always see my son's face in the photo. "Dad won't let anything hurt you." Even this has now begun to lose its effect. I found this to be the case when I spotted a stray cat wandering into the alley yesterday. It was just a simple white kitten, oblivious to the hell around it. By that time, I had just finished carving out my calves and was consuming them. Then I saw the kitten, the soft, tender, furry, and vulnerable creature. Slowly, I crept towards it, leaving for the first and only time from behind the dumpster. Just like with Harry, all I could think of was devouring this little creature whole. The pounding in my head was the most intense it had ever been. "I promise you, you'll never have to see me like them." That's when I stopped. I couldn't do it. The kitten looked up at me. Its eyes were simply observing me, unaware of the threat I almost posed to it. That was when I heard a scurrying come from the end of the alley. The scream rang out before I saw the kitten be snatched in an instant by one of them, a man with most of his face torn and flayed open. Like it was a small morsel, I watched as the man devoured the kitten almost whole. He turned to me, his blackened, icarus eyes sizing me up. I stood frozen, waiting for him to strike. He wouldn't have the chance, however, before another, a woman with bits of meaty flesh hanging from her mouth, charged at the man and pinned him down. I watched as she ravenously tore him to bits. Always a bigger fish. When she was finished and he was barely even a hunk of meat on the ground, she raised her head to the sky and screamed, while hastily tearing the skin from her face. Before I could react, she bounded from the man's body and brought me to the ground. Using her nails, she tore deep into my open wounds. The searing pain was soon drowned out by rage as the hunger returned. I grabbed her by her throat and proceeded to squeeze as hard as I could. She fought back, but her attempts were feeble against my hold on her. I heard myself utter as my grip tightened more and more. Eventually her flailing arms started to go limp. I thought my head was going to explode from the pressure of the pounding inside.
"Her flesh is weak and is..."
I stopped. I could see now that she had lost consciousness, not appearing to be breathing. Did I kill her? I checked for a pulse. Sure enough, she was still alive. I quickly scurried away from her, retreating back to behind the dumpster. The rest of the day was spent thinking, pondering about what I'd just done. I looked at my hands, the hands that came so close to causing me to break my promise. My hands cannot be trusted. That was when I began to carve the skin from my hands, using that to keep the FleshLust under control. It was probably one of the most painful parts of me to remove, but it was the only logical thing I knew to do in that moment to spare me a far more grievous pain in my heart. I promise you, you'll never have to see me like them. Eventually, however, the shock from the pain and the blood loss caused me to fall unconscious. At first, my dreams came vividly to me in the form of a memory, the last memory I have of my family being happy. I saw Harry and Martha running around in the park near our apartment.
"Tag, you're it."
Harry squeals, laughing.
"You better run, I'm gonna get ya. Come play with us, Dad."
"Oh no, I'm hit! Man down! Man down!" I shout to him. He pretends to radio for backup while gunning down imaginary soldiers. "Say cheese," I say, staring at the camera. Harry beside me.
"Cheese."
3, 2, 1, snap. 3, 2, 1, click.
"Daddy, who is that?"
He points to the grove leading into the nature trail. A man is shuffling towards us, his eyes black and skin tattered and mangled.
"He looks scary."
He tightly grasps my leg. I put my hand on his head. "It's okay, buddy. Dad's here." The man is now only a few feet away. I ask him if he's okay. He just continues forward. I hear him mutter. Harry's hold tightens around my leg. "You and your mother go get in the car." He just stands there holding on to my leg. "Go on, it'll be okay." The man lunges forward and grabs onto me, trying to bite at my face. I'm just barely able to hold him back. I'm able to shove him away and scramble towards the car. I look back to see him giving chase close behind. I make it back to the car. When I look behind, the man is being swarmed by others just like him. They rip him to shreds, devouring every bit of him before then ripping themselves apart with their own hands. The next thing I see is something new entirely. I began to see the mutilated carcasses begin to seemingly melt and spread across the ground beneath me. It continues to spread until the ground is nothing but living, pulsating flesh. That's when, from the new fleshy landscape, people are formed, screaming. That's when I woke up. It was dark by then and everything was quiet. I looked once more at my skinless hands. The chilling breeze stung the exposed parts all over my body. Why am I not dead? This led me to further ponder the latter part of the vision. Is this the secret of her existence? Just common garbage bound in skin, only to be recycled? It came as no surprise that I couldn't sleep that night. One thing has made itself clear to me: the dead are fortunate. They no longer have to worry about carrying out such an existence. They don't have to feel the pain of conscience, pain of loss, or physical torment. They just get to blissfully slip away, hopefully ignorant of the truth. I hear it happening again. I wonder who it'll be this time. 2 childhood friends, former lovers, maybe even just 2 strangers, never even knowing one another before. In any instance, there'll be nothing more than scraps of meat on the sidewalk in most likely less than 5 minutes. I think this time, now that the hunger is kicking in again and I'm running out of endurance to continue resisting, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna pray that when they finish whoever they're feasting on, that they'll make quick work of me before I have the chance to do the same to them. Most of all, I pray that Harry, my baby boy, never has to see the truth.
Only the dead are fortunate.